A German submarine officer stands in a Kansas mess hall, staring at his dinner tray. White bread, real butter, pork chops, potatoes, fresh vegetables, dessert. He hasn't seen this much food in 2 years. He's a prisoner of war, and he's eating better than he did as a free man in Germany. This is his first meal in America, and nothing will ever be the same. Between 1943 and 1945, 370,000 German POWs arrived in the United States. What they discovered here didn't just surprise them, it broke them psychologically. Because everything the Nazi propaganda machine had told them about America was a lie. This is the story of that awakening. Most German POWs captured in Europe expected to stay in Britain or North Africa. Instead, they were loaded onto Liberty ships and sent across the Atlantic. The journey took 2 to 3 weeks. During the crossing, something strange happened. The Red Cross provided rations, real coffee, chocolate, cigarettes, canned meat. The prisoners couldn't understand it. Germany was rationing everything. Even bread was mixed with sawdust by 1943. Yet here they were, prisoners, receiving luxuries most German civilians hadn't seen in years. U-boat Captain Hans Werner thought it was a trick. "They're fattening us up before executing us," he told fellow prisoners. This wasn't paranoia. This was what they'd been taught. Nazi propaganda claimed Americans were barbaric, that POWs would be tortured or killed. When the ships approached American ports, New York, Boston, Norfolk, the prisoners saw something impossible. The cities were lit up, fully lit. Every window, every street light, every building blazing with electric light. Oberstfreiter George Gardner later wrote, "I thought I was hallucinating." In Germany, we'd lived in blackout conditions since 1939. Not a single light after dark. But here, it looked like peacetime. Like there was no war at all. The lights weren't the only shock. The harbors were packed with ships. Dozens. Hundreds. Liberty ships, destroyers, aircraft carriers, cargo vessels. All brand new. All American-made. Luftwaffe pilot Franz von Vera counted 47 ships in New York Harbor during his transport in 1943. He'd been told American shipbuilding was struggling. Yet here was more tonnage than the entire German Kriegsmarine. The first crack in the propaganda appeared before they even stepped on American soil. The trains carrying German POWs rolled through the American heartland. Through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois. The prisoners stared out windows, seeing something that shouldn't exist during wartime. Farms. Endless farms. Untouched. Unoccupied. No bomb craters. No destroyed villages. Just mile after mile of wheat fields, corn, cattle. Gefreiter Helmut Horner remembered. "We kept waiting to see war damage. Destroyed factories. Rubble. There was nothing." America looked like a country at peace. When they arrived at Camp Concordia in Kansas, the shock intensified. The camp had been built in 3 months. Barracks, mess halls, recreation facilities, medical buildings, all constructed specifically for prisoners. The speed of construction was incomprehensible to men who'd watched Germany struggle to rebuild bombed cities. But nothing prepared them for dinner. The mess hall served 2 pork chops per person, mashed potatoes with real butter, fresh bread, white, not the dark ersatz bread of Germany, green beans, apple pie, real coffee, and milk. Hans Lammersdorf sat at the table and cried. Not from sadness, from disbelief. In Germany, the official military ration for frontline troops was 3,000 calories per day. In reality, most soldiers received far less. By 1943, German civilians were rationed to 1,500 calories daily. Meat was a rarity. Butter hadn't been seen in months. Coffee was made from acorns. The American POW meal contained approximately 4,000 calories. The Geneva Convention required that prisoners receive the same rations as the captor nation's troops. The Americans followed this rule precisely, and American soldiers ate extraordinarily well by any standard. Feldwebel Ernst Floater wrote in his diary, "I have eaten more in the last 3 days than the last 3 months in North Africa." The guards tell us this is normal. I don't believe them. This must be special treatment to interrogate us. It wasn't special treatment. This was standard. The abundance created a crisis of belief. These men had been told America was weak, decadent, on the verge of collapse. Roosevelt's Jewish plutocracy was supposedly failing. American industry was crippled. The people were starving. Yet here was undeniable proof of the opposite. Some prisoners rationalized it as propaganda in reverse. "They're showing us their best to demoralize us," said Unteroffizier Klaus Fischer. But as days turned to weeks, the rations never changed. The food kept coming. Always abundant. Always fresh. Always more than they could eat. The psychological impact was profound. German military doctrine emphasized sacrifice, hardship, and struggle. Soldiers were taught that suffering proved strength. But here was a different paradigm: abundance as strength. America wasn't suffering through the war, it was barely inconvenienced. And that was far more terrifying than any battlefield defeat. Within weeks, letters started flowing back to Germany. POWs were allowed to write home, censored of course, but the basic facts got through. We are treated well. Food is plentiful. America is not what we were told. These letters created panic in German intelligence. The Gestapo began intercepting them, afraid that news of American abundance would damage home front morale. They were right to worry. Camp Concordia wasn't unique. Across America, over 500 POW camps were established. From Texas to Montana, Florida to Washington State. Each camp told the same story of American industrial capacity. But food was just the beginning. The prisoners were about to discover something even more shocking: the sheer scale of American production. German POWs were put to work. Under the Geneva Convention, prisoners could be assigned labor tasks, and America desperately needed workers. Millions of American men were overseas fighting. Farms needed harvesting. Factories needed hands. The prisoners became laborers, and in doing so, they saw the machine up close. In Texas, POWs worked cotton fields that stretched to the horizon. Single farms larger than entire German districts. Harvesting machines, tractors, combines, all operated by individual farmers. Oberleutnant Heinrich Matthias worked on a farm near Hearne, Texas. He wrote, "One American farmer with his machines does the work of 50 German farmers. And he complains he doesn't have enough equipment. I asked him how many people worked this land before the war. He said just him and 2 hired men. I didn't believe it until I saw it." The mechanization was beyond anything they'd experienced. In Germany, farming was still heavily reliant on horses and manual labor. Tractors were rare and often requisitioned for military use. But in America, every farmer seemed to have multiple machines. And they weren't special military equipment. They were civilian tools, mass-produced and widely available. This pattern repeated across every industry prisoners encountered. Lumber camps in Oregon, where single saws cut through trees in seconds. Canneries in California processing tons of food per hour. Sugar beet farms in Montana operating with skeleton crews, but massive output. America wasn't just industrialized. It was automated. One of the most telling moments came at Camp Shelby in Mississippi. A group of Africa Corps veterans were assigned to work at a nearby sawmill. The mill processed lumber for military construction projects. The prisoners watched as logs entered one end of the facility and emerged as finished planks minutes later. Conveyor belts, automated saws, sorting machines. The entire process required just 12 workers per shift. Hauptmann Werner Krauss asked the foreman how long it took to build the mill. 6 weeks, came the reply. Krauss was stunned. In Germany, a facility like this would take a year to construct, if materials were even available. "How many mills like this exist in America?" he asked. The foreman shrugged. "Thousands, I suppose. Every town's got one. Thousands." That single word echoed in Krauss's mind. Thousands of mills. Thousands of factories. Thousands of farms. All producing at scales Germany couldn't match. The prisoners began doing math. If one mill produced this much lumber, and there were thousands of mills, then American production capacity was orders of magnitude beyond Germany's. And this was just lumber. What about steel? Aluminum? Aircraft? Tanks? Ships? The numbers became incomprehensible. When prisoners discussed it among themselves, many refused to believe it. "It's propaganda," they'd say. They're showing us fake numbers to break our morale. But the evidence kept mounting. Every camp told the same story. Every work assignment revealed the same industrial dominance. This wasn't propaganda. This was reality. Then came the moment that shattered all remaining illusions. The moment when prisoners saw American military production with their own eyes. In early 1944, a group of Luftwaffe pilots held at Camp Gruber in Oklahoma were given an unusual assignment. They were told they'd be touring a factory as part of a labor orientation program. The prisoners assumed it would be a small workshop or warehouse. Instead, they were taken to the Douglas aircraft plant in Tulsa. What they saw inside broke them. The factory floor stretched for what seemed like miles. Assembly lines producing B-24 Liberator bombers. Not one at a time. Dozens simultaneously, in different stages of completion. Fuselages, wings, engines, all moving down separate lines before final assembly. The noise was deafening. Riveting guns, welding torches, engine tests, all at once. Thousands of workers, many of them women, working in coordinated precision. Oberleutnant Franz Stigler, an ace pilot with 28 confirmed kills, stood frozen watching a B-24 roll off the line. He timed it. Another bomber was completed and moved out every 63 minutes. 1 bomber per hour. From this single factory, Stigler did the math in his head. 24 bombers per day, 168 per week, over 700 per month. From one factory, he knew Germany's entire aircraft production was struggling to produce 1,000 planes per month across all types, fighters, bombers, reconnaissance, everything. And here was one American factory producing 700 heavy bombers monthly. Just heavy bombers. Stigler asked the guide how many factories like this existed in America. Douglas has 3 plants producing B-24s. Consolidated has 5. Ford's Willow Run plant is bigger than this one. Then there's Boeing making B-17s, North American making B-25s, Martin making B-20SXS. The list kept going. Stigler stopped listening. The war was over. Germany had already lost. They just didn't know it yet. The tour continued. The prisoners saw the quality control process. Every rivet checked. Every weld inspected. Every engine tested. The Americans weren't just producing quantity. They were maintaining quality at scale. In Germany, by 1944, quality control had collapsed. Slave labor and rush production meant defects were common. Pilots joked darkly about whether their planes would be shot down by enemies or fall apart on their own. But here, in America, with production speeds that seemed impossible, quality remained high. The prisoners were given statistics. American aircraft production for 1943, 85,898 planes. German production for 1943, 24,807 planes. The Americans were outproducing Germany 3.5 to 1, and that gap was widening. By 1944, American production would hit 96,318 aircraft. German production would drop to 39,807. The psychological impact on the Luftwaffe prisoners was devastating. These were men who'd fought in the Battle of Britain, the Eastern Front, North Africa. They'd seen friends die. They'd nearly died themselves. And it was all for nothing. Germany never had a chance. Not against this level of industrial power. When they returned to camp that evening, the prisoners sat in stunned silence. Finally, Hauptmann Willy Heilmann spoke. We lost this war in 1941. We just didn't know it. No one disagreed. But aircraft production was just one aspect of American industry. The prisoners would soon learn about shipbuilding. And those numbers were even more staggering. In 1943, a group of Kriegsmarine POWs held at Camp McCain in Mississippi were assigned to work at a shipyard in Pascagoula. These were U-boat crews, men who'd fought in the Battle of the Atlantic. They understood naval warfare. They understood ships. What they didn't understand was how America built them. The shipyard was constructing Liberty's ships, the workhorses of the Allied supply chain. These were cargo vessels, 441 feet long, capable of carrying 9,000 tons. Before the war, building a ship like this took nearly a year. The Americans had reduced it to 45 days. 45 days from keel laying to launch. The prisoners watched in disbelief as welders, working in round-the-clock shifts, assembled prefabricated sections. The ship wasn't built from scratch on site. Components were manufactured in factories across the country, shipped to the yard, and assembled like a jigsaw puzzle. Captain Lieutenant Herbert Werner, a U-boat commander, watched a Liberty ship launch. He knew the U-boat fleet's mission was to sink Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced. The Kriegsmarine calculated they needed to sink 700,000 tons of shipping per month to cripple Britain. Some months they succeeded. But watching this launch, Werner realized the calculation was wrong. America wasn't just replacing ships. It was building them faster than Germany could sink them. He asked the yard supervisor how many Liberty ships had been built. Over 2,700 so far, and we're still going. 2,700 ships. The entire German merchant marine at the start of the war was 4,500 ships. America had built more than half that number in just cargo vessels alone during the war. And that wasn't counting destroyers, cruisers, battleships, aircraft carriers, submarines, landing craft, and hundreds of other vessel types. Werner did more math. The U-boat fleet had sunk approximately 3,000 Allied ships by 1943. It seemed like a victory. But America had built 2,700 Liberty ships alone, plus thousands of other vessels. The Allies weren't losing the shipping war. They were winning it. Overwhelmingly. Werner wrote in his diary, "We're drowning men throwing pebbles at a tidal wave." The truth was inescapable. American shipyards employed 1.7 million workers at peak production. Germany's entire shipbuilding industry employed 140,000. The ratio wasn't even close. America had industrialized war in a way no nation in history had ever achieved. The prisoners began to understand something profound. This wasn't just about factories or farms or shipyards. This was about an entirely different economic system. America's strength wasn't military, it was industrial. And that industrial base was built on something Germany didn't have: vast natural resources, a protected homeland, and a population that wasn't starving. Every aspect of American society reinforced this reality. POWs were shocked by the most mundane things. Garbage. American camps threw away food, leftover bread, uneaten vegetables. Scraps that would have been treasured in Germany were tossed in bins. Gefreiter Otto, Schultz remembered. "I watched a guard throw away half a sandwich. Just toss it. I asked if I could have it. He looked at me like I was crazy and said, 'We'll have fresh food in an hour.'" I couldn't comprehend that mentality. Clothing was another shock. POW uniforms were made from new fabric, not repurposed materials. When clothing wore out, it was replaced, not patched endlessly. Boots were leather, not ersatz materials. Even the guards' uniforms looked fresh and well-maintained. In Germany, by 1944, soldiers were wearing uniforms made from wood pulp fiber. Boots had cardboard soles. Nothing was wasted because nothing was abundant. In America, abundance was assumed. Medical care revealed more disparities. Camp hospitals had antibiotics, specifically penicillin. This drug, still experimental in Germany and reserved for the most critical cases, was used routinely in American POW camps. Infections that would be fatal in Germany were minor inconveniences in America. Dental care was provided. Not just emergency extractions, but actual dental work. Fillings, cleanings. Unteroffizier Paul Schneider had a tooth filled at Camp Ruston in Louisiana. He hadn't seen a dentist in 6 years. In Germany, dental care for soldiers was minimal. For civilians, it was non-existent. "They treat us better than Germany treats its own soldiers," Schneider told fellow prisoners. It wasn't an exaggeration. The recreation facilities were another psychological blow. POW camps had sports fields, libraries, craft workshops, and even theaters. Prisoners could play soccer, volleyball, and baseball. They could check out books, learn English, take correspondence courses. Camp McCain had a full orchestra composed of prisoner musicians. They performed weekly concerts. Prisoners at Camp Ruston published a newspaper in German, censored but allowed. Some camps had swimming pools. The contrast with conditions in Germany was stark. German civilians were living in bombed-out buildings, scrounging for food, working 12-hour factory shifts. Meanwhile, German POWs in America were playing soccer and attending concerts. The absurdity wasn't lost on the prisoners. Many felt guilty. They were safe, well-fed, and comfortable while their families suffered. Letters from home described increasingly desperate conditions. Cities destroyed by bombing, food shortages, fuel shortages, the elderly and children starving. Yet here they were, in camps that resembled vacation resorts more than prisons. This guilt created a strange psychological phenomenon. Some prisoners wanted the war to continue, hoping for German victory, even as evidence mounted that victory was impossible. Others wanted the war to end immediately to stop their families' suffering. Arguments erupted in camps between die-hard Nazis and those who'd accepted reality. The camp authorities had to separate prisoners to prevent violence. At Camp Alva in Oklahoma, a group of Wehrmacht POWs beat to death a fellow prisoner who'd openly praised America and criticized Hitler. The victim, Corporal Johannes Kunz, had worked on a local farm and returned talking enthusiastically about American efficiency. Hardcore Nazis in the camp viewed him as a traitor. They held a kangaroo court, found him guilty, and executed him. 5 prisoners were later convicted of murder by American courts and executed. This incident revealed the depth of ideological division among prisoners. Even facing overwhelming evidence of German defeat, some clung to Nazi ideology. But they were the minority. Most prisoners, by late 1944, had accepted reality. The turning point for many came when they met German Americans. Prisoners working on farms or in towns encountered Americans of German descent. These people spoke German, maintained German traditions, but were fiercely loyal to America. For prisoners raised on Nazi propaganda about racial purity and German superiority, this was confusing. How could these Germans thrive in a multicultural society? How could they maintain their identity while being American? Oberstfreiter Heinrich Koch worked on a farm in Wisconsin owned by a German-American family. The family had immigrated in the 1880s. They spoke German at home, ate German food, celebrated German holidays. But they had 3 sons serving in the U.S. Army, fighting against Germany. Koch asked the farmer how he reconciled this. The farmer replied, "Germany is where I'm from. America is where I belong." That simple statement encapsulated something the prisoners struggled to understand. Identity wasn't about racial purity or blood and soil. It was about choice and values. The farmer explained that his sons were fighting because they believed in American ideals. Freedom, democracy, opportunity. Not because they hated Germany, but because they loved America. This concept, patriotism based on shared values rather than shared blood, was foreign to men raised under National Socialism. Yet it clearly worked. America had unified millions of immigrants from dozens of countries into a coherent society that was defeating Germany. The prisoners began to question everything they'd been taught. If Nazi racial theory was correct, America's diversity should make it weak. But America was demonstrably strong. Therefore, the theory was wrong. This logical progression was happening in minds across hundreds of camps. The foundation of Nazi ideology was crumbling under the weight of observable reality. By 1945, as news of German defeats multiplied, most POWs had abandoned hope of German victory. The Battle of the Bulge failed. The Rhine was crossed. Berlin was surrounded. The question wasn't whether Germany would lose, but when. In camps across America, prisoners listened to news broadcasts. Unlike in Germany, where information was controlled, American radio reported both victories and setbacks. Prisoners heard about D-Day, the liberation of Paris, the Soviet advance. They heard casualty figures. They heard about concentration camps. This last piece of information created another psychological crisis. When American forces liberated camps like Buchenwald and Dachau, newsreels showed the horrors. These newsreels were shown to German POWs. Camp commanders wanted prisoners to see what their government had done. The reaction varied. Some prisoners denied it was real, claiming it was propaganda. Others were devastated, realizing they'd serve a regime that committed atrocities. Many had suspected something was wrong, but hadn't known the scale. Feldwebel Karl Schmidt watched footage of Buchenwald and vomited. He believed Germany was fighting a defensive war against enemies who wanted to destroy the German people. Seeing the skeletal prisoners, the mass graves, the gas chambers shattered that belief. "We are the monsters," he wrote in his diary. "We became what we claimed to fight against." Not all prisoners had this reaction. Die-hard Nazis claimed the footage was faked, but most couldn't deny what they saw. Too many details. Too much evidence. The Holocaust was real, and they'd served the regime responsible for it. This knowledge created lasting trauma. Years after the war, former POWs spoke about the shame they felt watching those newsreels. Not all Germans were complicit, but all Germans would bear the historical burden. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, reactions in American POW camps were mixed. Relief that the killing was over. Fear about what would happen next. Uncertainty about returning to a destroyed homeland. And for many, a strange gratitude toward America. They'd been treated humanely, fed well, kept safe. While their countrymen suffered and died, they'd lived comfortably. This created complex emotions. Repatriation didn't happen immediately. POW labor was still needed for American agriculture. Prisoners continued working on farms and in factories through 1945 and in 1946. Some didn't return to Germany until 1947. During this extended stay, something unexpected happened. Many prisoners formed genuine friendships with Americans. Farmers who'd employed POWs vouched for them. Some offered to sponsor prisoners as immigrants after the war. A few prisoners married local women. George Gartner, the prisoner who'd been amazed by American city lights, escaped from a camp in 1945 and lived illegally in America for decades. He worked odd jobs, assumed a new identity, and built a life. When he finally revealed himself in 1985, he faced deportation but was allowed to stay due to public support. Gartner explained, "I saw what America was. I knew I wanted to be part of it." He wasn't alone. Thousands of former POWs returned to Germany, endured the hardships of post-war reconstruction, and applied to immigrate to America. By the 1950s, many had succeeded. They became American citizens, bringing their families, building new lives. For these men, captivity in America had been liberation. The story of German POWs in America reveals something profound about World War II. Germany didn't lose because of military failures alone. Germany lost because it was fighting an economic system it couldn't match. Nazi ideology emphasized willpower, sacrifice, and struggle. But wars aren't won by willpower. They're won by resources, production, and logistics. America had resources Germany could only dream of. Oil fields that dwarfed Germany's synthetic fuel production. Iron ore deposits that made German mines look insignificant. Agricultural land that fed not just America, but its allies. Germany was strip mining its society for resources, melting down church bells for metal, conscripting teenagers and elderly men, burning books for fuel. America was operating at perhaps 70% industrial capacity and still vastly outproducing Germany. The contrast couldn't be starker.